you have heard of the JAM study? This particular study, surprisingly, has become more and more well-known over the years. It was popularized, actually, by Barry Schwartz, who's on the panel today, in his book, The Paradox of Choice. It was also popularized by Blink and written by Malcolm Gladwell. Received attention over the years from places like New York Times, Economist, Wall Street Journal, National Public Radio. I myself have learned more and more about this JAM study and what it actually means to people over the years through a variety of different contexts and from people from very different walks of life. A few years ago, I was on a conference much like this one, and I was sitting next to the head of Fidelity Research, and he was telling me about a problem that they had at Fidelity where they currently had 4,500 different mutual fund options for their clients, and they didn't quite know what to do given the JAM problem. I said, the JAM problem? He said, well, you know, we have this internal presentation, it's become our mantra, which says that we need to cut down on the number of choices that we offer our clients, otherwise we're going to lose business. And he told me that I absolutely needed to tell the MBA students about this problem. It was going to destroy the financial industry, and he was going to send me his slides. In fact, I sometimes use his slides. Last year, as part of a joint program with McKinsey, on leadership development, I was in the midst of meetings with MDs at McKinsey, and we were talking about ways in which we create better leadership development programs and develop better client relations. And the MD said, well, you know, and it's very important for client relations that they remember the 3x3 rule. 3x3 rule, what's that? Well, the way it goes is like this. When you meet a client, you give them 3 options. They choose one. Then you give them another 3 options, they choose one. And then you give them another 3 options, they choose one. And that's it. If you do it anything more than that, you're going to lose your client. 3x3 rule. I said, well, where'd you come up with this 3x3 rule? Well, we learned this from our internal memo that describes the JAM study. Okay. Well, last year I was on a plane ride, and I was sitting next to this woman, a middle-aged lady from Minnesota. She had a nice home in the country. She'd raised 4 kids, was a homemaker. And, you know, we were talking about shopping and all the difficulties one had sometimes to go shopping. And she just said, well, I'm just one of those JAM people. JAM people. Because, well, I just don't like making any choices. Who can make any choices anymore? I let everybody else do the choosing for me. I said, okay, well, I decided, you know, I confessed to her that I had done the JAM study. And she said, honey, you don't know what you're talking about. That study was done years ago. You must have done some new version of this thing you call the JAM study. So, now when that study appeared in 2000, I have to confess that I actually didn't even know what I was publishing. I didn't know whether I truly believed in the result. It just seemed like a fun factoid to publish at the time. I had no idea that I wasn't going to get, you know, stones thrown at me for publishing such a thing. I mean, after all, we lived in a culture which had the ethos of choice. And in fact, even I believe in the ethos of choice. I mean, choice is a good thing. I mean, who can imagine actually taking away choice? And what was I proposing? I was proposing we might want to limit or restrict people's choices. And over the years, though, through my own research, as well as through the research of other people, I've become more persuaded that maybe in the modern day economic environment, we might have a multiple choice problem. So what I'm going to do today is give you a very brief overview of what is the multiple choice problem. And it's more nuanced, I think, than the JAM study, and I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to describe different forms that the multiple choice problem takes, try to give you a sense of what the consequences are of giving people multiple choices, why we experience those consequences, and at the very end, give some thought to what are some potential remedies. So, we live in a society in which we believe that the more choice, the better. Certainly that's it seems like an intuitive principle. It's an obvious assumption. And obviously, if you have more choices, the more opportunities you have to find that which is best for you. And certainly over the last 8 years, there have been numerous efforts, not just in the consumer market industry, but certainly even in terms of our government policy, to consider how to make more choice help Americans. So when you think about George W. Bush and the various different policies that he tried to promote, it often involved the key ingredient of giving people more and more and more choice, that more choice would improve our health care, more choice would improve our educational system, more choice would give people better social security or improve retirement savings for people such that we could all live a more comfortable life at the point at which we're waiting to die. So, what actually happens when we give people more and more choice? Well, as I mentioned before, in the late 1990s, I did a jam study. And this jam study was done in an upscale grocery store. We didn't have as many upscale grocery stores in those days as we have now. Now they're much more commonplace and they're all over the place. But at that time, there was this fancy store called Draeger's. Wagaman's a more modern edition. Called Draeger's that was located in Menlo Park, California. This store, to give you an idea, it was quite a novel store at the time. It had like 350 different kinds of jam, 250 different kinds of mustard, 75 different olive oils, some of which were in this locked case because these olive oils were like over $1,000, 12 different types of apples, over 100 different types of bottled water, which is commonplace today. But, in those days, my God, thinking about water, can you even taste the difference? But anyway, this store really marketed choice, and to such a large extent that they every day had a busload of Japanese tourists show up to take pictures of all the choices that they had. And so one of the common features that they did to introduce the customers to the various varietals that they offered was they would set up tasting booths. So we decided to set up a tasting booth, and this study was done with my advisor, Mark Lepper. I was a Ph.D. student at the time. So we set up a tasting booth in this store where we either put out 6 different flavors of Wilkin & Sons jams or 24 different flavors of Wilkin & Sons jam. And we measured 2 things. First, in which case are people more likely to stop, the passers-by that walk into the store, are they more likely to stop at the display? And second, in which case are people more likely, once given a coupon to give them $1 off a jar of jam, more likely to actually buy a jar of jam? So we had little codes behind these little coupons so that we could actually track their purchasing.